Everything we were taught about the Great Pyramid might be wrong. For nearly 5,000 years, the Great Pyramid of Giza has stood in the desert, massive, silent, and almost untouchable. And for just as long, we've been told a very specific story about it. Pharaoh Khufu built it as his tomb. Thousands of workers, roughly 20 years, copper tools, wooden sleds, ropes, and raw human determination. That's the official explanation. End of story. Or so it seems. Because the moment you stop accepting that version at face value and start asking how, things get complicated fast. Here's a question most people never really think about. What is this story actually based on? Not reconstructions, not modern theories, not explanations created thousands of years later. Actual evidence. The ancient Egyptians recorded almost everything: taxes, harvests, religious rituals, royal ceremonies, even ordinary daily life. Yet when it comes to the construction of the largest stone structure ever built by humans, the historical record suddenly goes quiet. There are no detailed construction logs, no step-by-step descriptions of how the pyramid was built, no inscriptions inside the structure clearly explaining the process, at least none that directly describe it. And that silence is strange. Quick note before we go further, we're not claiming absolute truth here. We're exploring historical debates and unanswered questions, not rewriting history, just asking why some questions remain unresolved. Now, when researchers try to push deeper into those gaps, they often encounter resistance. For decades, access to the pyramids has been tightly controlled, most notably under Egypt's most influential archaeologist, Dr. Zahi Hawass. Critics argue that alternative ideas and independent research rarely receive fair examination. Supporters, however, say this level of control helps maintain scientific standards and prevents damage to irreplaceable sites. Both perspectives exist, and that tension matters. Because if the traditional explanation is fully settled, then new evidence and fresh analysis should strengthen it, not threaten it. And yet, certain questions seem to linger just beneath the surface. Questions about missing records, questions about construction methods, questions about why this monument appears so different from anything that came after it. If you enjoy examining history this way, carefully, thoughtfully, without jumping to conclusions, consider subscribing. This channel explores ancient mysteries by looking at what we know, what we don't, and why that gap still exists. Because in the next part, we'll focus on something even harder to explain. The Great Pyramid is supposed to be Khufu's tomb, so why does it look nothing like any other royal tomb in Egypt? In Part 2, we'll examine the missing body, the missing inscriptions, and the details that make historians quietly uneasy. Khufu's tomb, the pyramid that breaks every rule. If the Great Pyramid truly was built as Pharaoh Khufu's final resting place, then what we're about to see should feel familiar. It should follow patterns, it should match traditions, it should resemble other royal tombs found across ancient Egypt. But it doesn't. And that's where the questions begin. Egyptian royal tombs were never subtle. They were designed to declare power, legacy, and divine authority. Walls filled with hieroglyphs, sacred texts meant to guide the soul through the afterlife, scenes of the pharaoh meeting the gods, treasures, statues, and carefully arranged burial goods meant to secure immortality. Now, step inside the Great Pyramid. There are no inscriptions glorifying Khufu, no religious texts carved into the walls, no artwork depicting the afterlife, no funerary scenes, no treasures, and no confirmed remains. That absence alone raises eyebrows. Some scholars suggest the pyramid may have served a symbolic or ceremonial role rather than functioning as a traditional burial chamber. But even that explanation leaves important questions unanswered.
because symbolism alone doesn't explain why the interior of such a monumental structure is almost entirely undecorated. A common explanation is looting, but here's the issue with that argument. Even looted tombs leave traces behind: broken sarcophagi, fragments of inscriptions, damaged reliefs, evidence that something was once there. Inside the Great Pyramid, those traces are almost entirely missing. At the center of the king's chamber sits a massive granite box, often described as a sarcophagus. It has no lid, no inscriptions, no carvings, no ornamentation of any kind. It does not resemble how Egyptian kings were typically buried. Which leads to another uncomfortable question. If this pyramid was so central to Khufu's legacy, why does his name barely appear inside it? The few markings often cited as evidence were found deep within hidden construction spaces. These areas were never intended to be visible, which has led some researchers to question how and when those markings were applied. The issue remains debated, and no consensus has been reached. Now, consider the bigger pattern. If the Great Pyramid represented the height of Egyptian engineering, why didn't later pharaohs replicate it? Why do later pyramids appear smaller, less precise, and structurally weaker? Why does pyramid construction seem to decline after Giza rather than improve? In most civilizations, technology evolves gradually. Here, the Great Pyramid appears suddenly, highly refined, followed by structures that struggle to match its quality. That doesn't look like a clear technological progression. Some researchers argue it resembles the reuse or inheritance of advanced knowledge rather than its initial development. This idea remains speculative, and no definitive archaeological evidence currently confirms it. Still, the pattern raises questions historians continue to debate. What if Khufu didn't design the Great Pyramid from scratch, but adapted or repurposed something that already existed? Because in the next part, we'll move beyond historical records and into physical evidence: the stone itself, the precision cuts, the drilling marks, and the engineering details that modern tools still struggle to reproduce. And once you see that, the standard explanations begin to feel incomplete, the stonework that defies simple explanations. At some point, every historical explanation reaches a breaking point, the moment where answers stop feeling complete and start feeling strained. For the Great Pyramid, it doesn't come from missing names or debated timelines. It comes from the stone itself. Because when you stop viewing the pyramid as a symbol and start examining it as an engineering project, the questions multiply fast. The Great Pyramid isn't just massive, it's extraordinarily precise. Its alignment to true north is accurate to a fraction of a degree, a level of precision that still impresses modern surveyors. Today, achieving that accuracy requires calibrated instruments, clear reference points, and careful measurement. The traditional explanation suggests this was accomplished using simple tools like plumb lines, sighting rods, and naked eye observation. Some researchers argue this level of accuracy is achievable with those methods. Others aren't convinced. But alignment is only the beginning. Inside the pyramid, especially in the king's chamber, the builders used granite rather than limestone. Granite is one of the hardest natural stones on Earth. Even today, shaping it cleanly requires hardened steel tools and modern equipment. According to conventional history, ancient Egyptian stoneworkers relied primarily on relatively soft copper tools. That's where the explanation begins to feel stretched. Engineer Christopher Dunn closely examined the granite blocks inside the king's chamber and identified several unusual features: straight, uniform cuts, exceptionally smooth surfaces, and drilled holes with spiral markings that suggest controlled, consistent rotation rather than irregular hand drilling. His interpretations are debated, but the physical features themselves are not. Multiple researchers agree these marks exist. The disagreement centers on how they were produced. Modern experiments attempting to reproduce similar cuts with copper tools have struggled. The tools degrade quickly, material removal is slow, and while progress can be made, the results often fall short of matching the precision observed inside the pyramid. This doesn't automatically mean the ancient builders used advanced machines, but it does suggest their methods were more sophisticated than simple hammer and chisel work. Then there's the issue of scale. Some granite blocks inside the pyramid weigh between 60 and 80 tons. They were quarried in Aswan, transported hundreds of miles to Giza, lifted into position, and set with remarkable accuracy. Mainstream explanations point to sleds, manpower, lubrication techniques, and careful planning.
In theory, these methods could work. In practice, even modern engineers acknowledge the task would push the limits of coordination, precision, and structural control, especially without advanced lifting technology. The interior architecture deepens the puzzle. The Grand Gallery isn't just a corridor. Its corbelled walls, precise angles, and load distribution design behave like a carefully engineered system rather than an improvised solution. Structurally, it appears intentional from the start. Which leads to an uncomfortable observation. The Great Pyramid doesn't resemble tentative or experimental engineering. It doesn't look like a first attempt. It looks like the product of builders who already understood exactly what they were doing. Some researchers argue this implies a longer missing developmental timeline. Others suggest inherited knowledge passed down from earlier cultures, and many Egyptologists maintain that human ingenuity alone can explain the achievement. The truth is, we don't fully know, but what we do know is this. The Great Pyramid still hasn't revealed everything it's hiding. In Part 4, we'll go inside, into sealed shafts, hidden chambers, and discoveries that proved the Great Pyramid is far from fully explored. Sealed shafts and the rooms yet to be explored. By now, one thing should be clear. The Great Pyramid is not a solved monument, and nowhere is that more evident than inside it. Most people picture the pyramid's interior as simple, a few chambers, a few corridors, and nothing more. The king's chamber, the queen's chamber, some passageways connecting them. But that understanding is incomplete. As exploration techniques improved, researchers began to realize the pyramid contains more internal space than earlier maps ever accounted for. Areas too narrow for humans, passages that didn't appear to serve obvious ceremonial purposes, and spaces whose function remains unclear. One of the most important discoveries came in the early 1990s. A German engineer named Rudolf Gantenbrink was asked to investigate narrow shafts leading out of the Queen's Chamber, shafts long assumed to be symbolic and insignificant. To explore them, he designed a small robotic camera capable of navigating the tight passages. What it encountered was unexpected. Deep within one of the shafts, the robot reached a carefully fitted limestone block. This wasn't collapsed debris. It wasn't a random obstruction. The stone appeared deliberately placed, smooth, and precisely cut, complete with two small copper fittings embedded in its surface. The discovery became known as Gantenbrink's door. Naturally, attention turned to a single question: what lies beyond it? Before that question could be answered, the exploration was paused. According to official statements at the time, the halt was attributed to administrative and preservation concerns, a reminder that ancient structures require careful oversight to avoid unintended damage. Nearly a decade later, research resumed under a new team. Using minimally invasive methods, they drilled a small hole through the limestone block and inserted a camera. Behind the first door, they found something no one expected: another sealed limestone block. That second door remains unopened. Preservation specialists emphasize caution, noting that even small disturbances can have long-term effects on fragile ancient structures. Critics, however, point out that modern non-destructive technologies are already in use elsewhere.
which has kept the debate alive ever since. Then, in 2017, a different kind of discovery shifted the conversation again. An international team of scientists used muon radiography, a technique that tracks cosmic particles passing through stone, to scan the pyramid's interior without touching it. The results revealed a large, previously unknown void above the Grand Gallery, comparable in size to known chambers. The finding was widely described as one of the most significant pyramid discoveries in decades. Yet the void has not been entered. No one knows its purpose, no one knows its contents, and no public timeline for exploration has been announced. As of now, researchers say further study is still under review. What this means is simple. The Great Pyramid still contains unexplored spaces, features whose function is unknown, and architectural choices that continue to puzzle modern science. Whether these spaces were symbolic, structural, or something else entirely remains an open question. As with many ancient mysteries, ongoing research may change what we understand in the future. But one thing is certain: the Great Pyramid has not finished telling its story. In Part 5, we'll examine how archaeological decisions are made, who sets the boundaries of research, and how history balances preservation with discovery. Who decides what gets studied? By now, it's clear that unanswered questions about the Great Pyramid don't exist because no one is curious. They exist because archaeology is not driven by curiosity alone. It's driven by process. Every excavation, scan, or investigation requires approval, permits, oversight committees, preservation assessments, and long-term planning. Ancient sites are fragile, and once something is damaged, it's gone forever. Because of that, modern archaeology operates carefully, sometimes slowly, and often conservatively. This isn't unique to Egypt. Around the world, archaeologists face the same challenge: how to balance discovery with protection, how to explore the past without destroying it in the process. In Egypt, that balance is especially delicate. The pyramids aren't just historical monuments, they're national symbols, economic pillars, and irreplaceable cultural heritage. Any decision to excavate or explore deeper carries consequences far beyond academia. Critics of the system argue that this caution can slow progress and limit independent research. Supporters respond that strict oversight is necessary to prevent irreversible harm and ensure scientific standards are upheld. Both views exist, and most delays are better explained by bureaucracy, logistics, and preservation concerns than intent. Still, this system has an effect. It determines which questions move forward, which technologies are approved, and which mysteries remain unresolved. This doesn't mean archaeology is hiding answers. It means archaeology moves deliberately, often more slowly than public curiosity would like. And when it comes to a monument as complex as the Great Pyramid, that tension becomes unavoidable. Because the pyramid doesn't fit neatly into a single discipline. Understanding it requires engineers, geologists, astronomers, historians, and materials scientists working together, each with different methods, assumptions, and limitations. That collaboration takes time, and until it happens fully, some questions remain open, not because they are forbidden, but because they are difficult. Perhaps that's the real story behind many ancient mysteries. Not secrecy, not obstruction, but caution. And caution, while necessary, often leaves us waiting. In Part 6, we'll look at one area where caution and curiosity collide, the timeline itself. A timeline that doesn't sit quietly. The timeline of ancient Egypt is one of the most studied and refined historical frameworks in the world. Dynasties are catalogued, rulers are dated, events are cross-checked with inscriptions and records. For the most part, it works. According to this framework, the Great Pyramid was built around 2550 BC during the reign of Pharaoh Khufu. This date is widely accepted and supported by historical context. For now, the accepted timeline remains intact, but some researchers have asked a quieter question, not whether the timeline is wrong, but whether it fully explains everything we see. The issue isn't the dates themselves, it's how comfortably the evidence fits within them. One example comes from geology. Around the Giza Plateau, particularly near the Great Sphinx, some geologists have identified erosion patterns that appear consistent with prolonged exposure to heavy rainfall rather than wind and sand alone. This has led to debate. Some researchers suggest this could indicate a wetter climate during an earlier period. Others argue alternative explanations exist, including localized conditions or later restoration effects. The issue remains contested. What matters is not which interpretation is correct, but that geology introduces an independent line of inquiry, one that doesn't rely on texts or inscriptions, but on physical evidence shaped by natural forces. This doesn't overturn the established timeline. It challenges how confidently we interpret certain features within it, and that distinction is important. History is strongest when multiple disciplines align. When they don't, it doesn't mean one side is wrong, it means understanding is still evolving.
The Great Pyramid sits at the center of that evolution, not as proof of an alternative past, but as a reminder that even well-established timelines can contain unresolved questions. In Part 7, we'll explore another discipline that entered the discussion, not to replace archaeology, but to complement it. When the sky became evidence. For most of history, archaeology focused on what could be touched: stone, bone, inscriptions. But at some point, researchers began asking whether the sky itself played a role in ancient design. Astronomy entered the conversation cautiously. At Giza, researchers noticed that the layout of the three main pyramids bears a resemblance to the stars of Orion's belt. The observation was intriguing, but resemblance alone is not evidence. Some scholars suggested the alignment could be symbolic, others argued it may be coincidental, and many maintained that the pattern, while interesting, proves nothing on its own. That debate continues. What matters is how the idea was handled. Responsible researchers did not claim proof. They did not assert intent. They did not replace archaeology with astronomy. Instead, astronomy was framed as a lens, a way to explore how ancient cultures may have understood their world. This matters because ancient Egyptians placed great symbolic importance on the sky. Stars, cycles, and cosmic order played central roles in their belief systems. Exploring whether those beliefs influenced architecture is reasonable, as long as it's done carefully. And it was. Astronomy doesn't replace archaeology, it complements it. When used responsibly, it adds context rather than conclusions. And in the case of the Great Pyramid, it reminds us that monuments can operate on multiple levels: physical, symbolic, and cultural, often all at once. In Part 8, we'll bring these perspectives together and ask a different kind of question, not who built it, but what it may have been built to do. A monument with more than one purpose. For a long time, the Great Pyramid has been treated as a problem that needs a single answer: who built it, when it was built, why it was built. But perhaps that expectation is part of the difficulty. Most ancient monuments weren't designed to serve just one role. They were ceremonial, symbolic, political, and practical, often all at once. The Great Pyramid may be no different. It can be a royal monument and an engineering achievement, a cultural symbol and a functional structure, a reflection of belief and a product of technical skill. These ideas don't cancel each other out. They coexist.
When we allow for that possibility, the pyramid becomes less of a riddle demanding a final solution and more of a complex artifact shaped by multiple intentions. This doesn't require rewriting history, it doesn't require rejecting established timelines, and it doesn't require hidden truths. It requires flexibility. The Great Pyramid may not fit neatly into modern categories because it wasn't built for modern minds. It was created within a worldview where symbolism, function, and belief were inseparable. And perhaps expecting a single explanation is what has kept the debate stuck. Understanding doesn't always come from narrowing possibilities. Sometimes it comes from expanding them carefully. The pyramid doesn't need to be reduced to one purpose to be understood. It needs to be approached with patience. Because some monuments weren't meant to answer one question. They were meant to carry many. What future research might reveal? For most of human history, archaeology was limited by a simple constraint. If something couldn't be safely uncovered, it remained unknown. Excavation was often the only path forward, and excavation always carried risk. Stone could crack, chambers could collapse, context could be lost forever. That reality shaped how ancient monuments were studied for generations. Today, that limitation is slowly changing. Advances in non-invasive technology have given researchers new ways to explore structures like the Great Pyramid without removing a single stone. Tools such as ground-penetrating radar, muon radiography, microgravity sensing, and high-resolution 3D laser scanning allow scientists to observe internal features while preserving the monument itself. These methods don't replace traditional archaeology, they extend it. The discovery of the previously unknown void above the Grand Gallery is a clear example. No excavation was required, no damage was done. Data alone revealed that the internal structure of the pyramid was more complex than previously understood. But it's important to understand what these technologies actually provide. They don't explain why a space exists. They don't reveal symbolism or intent. They don't tell stories. They generate measurements, densities, and anomalies, information that still requires careful interpretation. Future research may help clarify whether hidden spaces serve structural purposes, such as reducing weight or managing stress, or whether they had symbolic or ceremonial roles. It may reveal construction sequences, internal reinforcements, or design choices that help explain how the pyramid has remained stable for thousands of years. It may also confirm something less satisfying, but equally important, that some features were never meant to be accessed at all. In archaeology, uncertainty is not failure. It is often an honest outcome. Each new scan narrows some questions while opening others. As methods improve, interpretations evolve. What once appeared mysterious may become mundane. What once seemed simple may grow more complex. This gradual process can feel slow, especially to a public eager to definitive answers, but archaeology is cumulative by nature. It advances through patience, replication, and restraint. The Great Pyramid will not yield its secrets all at once. Instead, understanding will likely emerge through incremental refinement, data layered upon data, interpretation tested against evidence, and conclusions adjusted as new information appears. That doesn't diminish the monument's mystery, it deepens it. Because the more carefully we study the pyramid, the clearer it becomes that it was built with foresight, not only to endure physically, but also to endure intellectually. In Part 10, we'll shift perspectives and examine how modern engineers approach the Great Pyramid, not as historians, but as problem solvers, analyzing one of the most durable structures ever built. When engineers ask different questions. When historians examine the Great Pyramid, they often focus on context, dynasty, symbolism, cultural meaning. Engineers approach it differently. They ask how something works.
From an engineering perspective, the Great Pyramid is not just a monument. It is a structure that has resisted gravity, erosion, seismic activity, and environmental stress for nearly 5 millennia. That alone makes it remarkable. Engineers studying the pyramid focus on fundamentals, load distribution, material behavior, geometry, and redundancy. They examine how weight moves through the structure and how internal chambers interact with the surrounding mass of stone. What they see is not randomness. The pyramid's shape naturally channels weight downward and outward, reducing stress on internal spaces. Its massive limestone core absorbs pressure, while harder granite is used selectively where strength matters most, such as in the king's chamber. These are not accidental outcomes. They suggest planning informed by experience. That doesn't require modern technology. It requires observation, experimentation, and knowledge passed down through generations, processes that don't always leave clear archaeological traces. One question engineers often ask is whether the Great Pyramid shows signs of correction. Large projects typically include evidence of adjustment, misalignments, reinforcements added after construction begins, visible compromises. In the pyramid, such signs are surprisingly limited. This has led some engineers to describe the structure as confident rather than experimental, not perfect, but deliberate. That assessment doesn't contradict archaeology, it complements it. It suggests that by the time construction began, the builders already understood the principles they were applying. How that understanding developed remains open to debate, but the outcome speaks for itself. Another area of interest is longevity. Many ancient structures fail over time. The Great Pyramid has not. Its durability raises questions about design choices that prioritized stability over convenience, choices that may not have been fully appreciated until centuries later. Engineers don't see this as evidence of lost technology or hidden knowledge. They see it as the result of conservative design, building well within known limits, favoring reliability over risk. That mindset is common in successful engineering across all eras. From this perspective, the Great Pyramid appears less like an anomaly and more like an extreme example of something humans do well when conditions allow. Plan carefully, build patiently, and think long-term. Engineering doesn't solve every historical question, but it reinforces an important point. Whatever uncertainties remain about purpose or process, the Great Pyramid reflects a level of organizational and technical understanding that deserves respect, not mystification. In Part 11, we'll look even closer at the materials themselves and what stone can reveal when examined at the smallest scale. What the materials still remember. When written records are limited or absent, material becomes the archive. Stone, unlike text, does not exaggerate. It doesn't reinterpret itself. It simply carries the marks of how it was handled, shaped, and placed. For researchers studying the Great Pyramid, this makes material evidence especially valuable. Every block tells a quiet story. Material scientists and geologists examining the pyramid focus on properties that often go unnoticed: grain structure, fracture patterns, surface wear, and mineral composition. These details reveal not who built the pyramid, but how decisions were made during its construction. One of the most important choices was material selection. The bulk of the pyramid is limestone, sourced locally from the Giza Plateau. It's relatively easy to quarry, shape, and transport in large quantities. But inside the pyramid, particularly in structurally sensitive areas, limestone gives way to granite.
Granite is significantly harder. It resists compression, deformation, and long-term stress. It is also far more difficult to work with. Using granite where it mattered most suggests deliberate planning. The builders understood that different materials behave differently under load, and they used that knowledge strategically. This isn't speculation, it's observable in where granite appears and where it doesn't. Material placement matters as much as material choice. In the king's chamber, massive granite beams are arranged to redirect weight away from the chamber itself. Above them, a series of relieving spaces further distribute pressure, reducing the chance of collapse. This system reflects an understanding of stress management that doesn't rely on theory, only on experience. That experience didn't need to be written down. Knowledge can be transmitted through practice, through repetition, through apprenticeship, through failure corrected over time. Not every form of understanding leaves behind a record we recognize as history. Microscopic analysis of tool marks adds another layer. The surfaces of stone blocks show consistency. Cuts follow predictable patterns. Edges are controlled. Variations exist, but they fall within narrow ranges. This suggests standardized methods rather than improvisation. Importantly, none of this requires advanced technology. It requires familiarity. Familiarity with stone behavior, familiarity with force, familiarity with consequence. The builders didn't need modern terminology to understand compression, fracture, or stability. They only needed to observe what worked and repeat it. This perspective shifts how we think about ancient construction. Instead of asking whether ancient people had access to tools we don't recognize, material analysis asks a different question. How much practical knowledge can accumulate before it leaves obvious traces? The Great Pyramid may represent not a technological leap, but the visible peak of long-developed material understanding, much of which simply didn't survive in written form. Stone remembers what paper forgets. And in the case of the Great Pyramid, the materials suggest builders who respected limits, planned conservatively, and understood the consequences of their choices long before the first block was set. In Part 13, we'll step back from construction entirely and ask why the Great Pyramid continues to matter, not just to archaeologists, but to the modern world. Rethinking labor, organization, and scale. For generations, the construction of the Great Pyramid was imagined as chaos on a massive scale, endless lines of exhausted workers dragging stones under brutal conditions, driven by force rather than coordination. Modern evidence tells a very different story. Archaeology near the Giza Plateau has uncovered worker settlements, food production areas, and infrastructure that suggest the pyramid was built not through disorder, but through organization. These were not temporary camps. They were planned communities with housing, bakeries, medical care, and supply systems. This changes how we understand the project. Large-scale construction does not succeed through strength alone. It succeeds through logistics, planning, scheduling, specialization, and leadership. The Great Pyramid required all of these. Researchers now believe the workforce was composed of skilled laborers, supported by rotating crews, rather than a single continuous mass of workers. Many likely worked seasonally during periods when agricultural labor was reduced due to flooding along the Nile. This approach makes sense. It allowed Egypt to mobilize labor without collapsing its economy. It also created a workforce familiar with specific tasks, quarrying, shaping, transport, and placement, rather than relying on untrained effort. Skill matters. Stone carving improves with repetition. Transport becomes more efficient with experience. Errors decrease when systems stabilize. Over time, coordination replaces brute force. The pyramid reflects this. Blocks are consistent in size and placement. Pathways appear planned rather than improvised. The flow of materials from quarry to construction site suggests an understanding of supply chains long before the term existed. This doesn't require modern management theory. It requires foresight and structure, traits found in many successful ancient societies. Evidence also suggests workers were not disposable. Skeletal remains show signs of healed injuries, indicating access to medical treatment. Diet analysis points to consistent nutrition rather than starvation. These details suggest a workforce that was maintained, not expended. That matters. A project lasting decades cannot rely on constant replacement. It depends on continuity, knowledge carried forward by people who understand the process.
From this perspective, the Great Pyramid becomes less mysterious and more impressive. Not because it defies human capability, but because it exemplifies it. The scale was enormous. The coordination was complex. The margin for error was small, and yet the system held. This reframing doesn't eliminate unanswered questions, it grounds them. Instead of asking how an impossible structure was built, we begin asking how a society organized itself well enough to attempt it and succeed. The pyramid stands not only as a monument of stone, but as evidence of collective effort sustained over time. That may be one of its most overlooked achievements. In Part 13, we'll step back from construction entirely and ask why the Great Pyramid continues to matter, not just to archaeologists, but to the modern world. Why the Great Pyramid still matters. At some point, every discussion about the Great Pyramid moves beyond construction methods and historical dates, not because those questions stop mattering, but because something larger takes over. The Great Pyramid continues to matter because it has outlived its original context. Empires rose and fell around it. Languages disappeared. Belief systems transformed, yet the structure remained largely unchanged long after the people who built it were gone. That endurance alone demands attention. Most ancient monuments are known through fragments, foundations, broken walls, scattered inscriptions. The Great Pyramid stands nearly intact. Its survival allows each generation to engage with it directly rather than through reconstruction or imagination. That immediacy matters. The pyramid isn't filtered through text alone. It can be measured, examined, walked through, and studied from multiple perspectives. Engineers, historians, architects, artists, and scientists can all stand before the same structure and ask different questions, and none of them are irrelevant. This is part of why the pyramid resists final explanations. It doesn't belong to a single discipline, it doesn't serve a single interpretation, and it doesn't yield easily to narrow frameworks. In many ways, the Great Pyramid functions as a mirror. Each era sees in it what it values most. Earlier generations emphasized power and divine authority. Later scholars focused on chronology and dynasties. Modern researchers examine materials, logistics, and systems. The public sees mystery, endurance, and scale. None of these views are wrong. None of them are complete. The pyramid's significance also lies in what it reveals about human ambition. Building something meant to last beyond a lifetime, beyond memory, requires a worldview oriented toward permanence. That mindset contrasts sharply with much of the modern world, where structures are often designed for efficiency rather than endurance. The Great Pyramid was not built to be replaced. It was built to remain. That decision shaped everything about it: material choice, scale, geometry, and construction method. Durability was not an afterthought, it was the goal. This may explain why the pyramid continues to command attention.
It represents a form of thinking that prioritizes continuity over speed, resilience over convenience, and that lesson still resonates. The Great Pyramid doesn't need hidden secrets or extraordinary explanations to remain compelling. Its presence alone is enough. The fact that it continues to generate debate is not a failure of history, it is a sign of relevance. Some monuments fade as they are understood. Others endure because they cannot be reduced to a single meaning. The Great Pyramid belongs to the second category. It stands not as a question demanding an answer, but as a structure that continues to invite careful thought. In Part 14, we'll explore why disagreement about the pyramid isn't a weakness, but an essential part of how understanding progresses. Why disagreement isn't a failure of history. Disagreement makes people uneasy. When experts don't agree, it's often interpreted as a problem, a sign that something is wrong, incomplete, or unreliable. But in serious historical and scientific inquiry, disagreement is not a weakness, it's a signal. In fields like archaeology, history, and geology, disagreement usually means evidence is complex, incomplete, or open to multiple interpretations. That is not unusual. It is normal. The Great Pyramid sits at the center of this kind of debate. Some researchers emphasize cultural context and written tradition. Others focus on engineering behavior, material evidence, or environmental factors. Each approach highlights different aspects of the same structure. None of these perspectives cancels out the others. They overlap, and where they overlap, understanding grows.
Disagreement persists because the Great Pyramid does not fit neatly into a single explanatory model. It is simultaneously a cultural artifact, a structural system, a symbolic monument, and a historical record. No single discipline can fully account for all of those dimensions. That creates friction, but productive friction. When archaeologists debate timelines, they refine chronology. When engineers question methods, they clarify constraints. When geologists examine erosion, they add environmental context. Each challenge forces assumptions to be tested rather than repeated. Importantly, disagreement does not imply deception or bad faith. Most debates surrounding the Great Pyramid are not about hidden truths, but about interpretation. Scholars often agree on the physical facts, measurements, materials, layout, while differing on what those facts mean. That distinction matters. A lack of consensus does not mean history is broken. It means it is still being written. This is especially true for ancient subjects, where evidence is finite and cannot be replaced once lost. Caution, therefore, becomes part of the method. Claims must be weighed carefully, not because new ideas are unwelcome, but because once accepted, they shape how future research unfolds. In that sense, restraint is a form of responsibility. Public fascination with the pyramid sometimes amplifies disagreement, making debates appear more dramatic than they are. What might be a technical discussion within academic circles can seem like a major conflict when viewed from the outside. But most of the time, progress happens quietly, through peer review, through re-examination of data, through incremental shifts in interpretation rather than sudden reversals. The Great Pyramid has been studied for centuries, and each generation has understood it slightly differently. That pattern does not indicate confusion, it reflects learning. History is not a fixed narrative delivered all at once, it is a process. And disagreement is how that process moves forward. Rather than asking why experts don't agree, a better question might be why we expect them to. Complex subjects rarely yield simple answers. The Great Pyramid reminds us that some of humanity's most enduring achievements cannot be reduced to certainty alone. They require patience, humility, and a willingness to accept that understanding evolves.
In Part 15, we'll step back from debate entirely and reflect on what the Great Pyramid ultimately represents, not as a problem to solve, but as a legacy to understand. What the Great Pyramid ultimately represents. After centuries of study, debate, and speculation, the Great Pyramid remains what it has always been, a human creation that resists being reduced to a single explanation. That may be its most important lesson. So much effort has gone into trying to answer one question at a time: who built it, how it was built, when it was completed, or what purpose it served. Each of those questions matters. Each adds clarity, but none of them alone captures what the Great Pyramid represents. It was not built for modern categories. To the people who designed and constructed it, there was no sharp line between function and symbolism, between engineering and belief, between practical need and cultural meaning. These elements were intertwined. Separating them now can help us analyze the structure, but it can also limit our understanding. The pyramid may have been a royal monument. It may have held symbolic meaning tied to the afterlife. It may have been designed with structural foresight unmatched in its time. These ideas do not compete with one another. They coexist. Modern discussions sometimes assume that understanding requires narrowing possibilities until only one remains. But ancient monuments often demand the opposite approach. They were created within worldviews that embraced layers of meaning rather than singular purpose. The pyramid's endurance reflects that mindset. It was built slowly, it was built conservatively, and it was built to last beyond memory. That longevity is not accidental. It reflects a commitment to permanence, a belief that what was being created mattered far beyond the present moment. In that sense, the Great Pyramid is not just a relic of the past, it is a statement about time itself. What makes the pyramid enduring is not mystery alone, but restraint. The builders chose stability over speed, reliability over convenience, and continuity over novelty. Those choices are visible in the stone, in the layout, and in the absence of excess. The monument does not overwhelm with ornamentation. It does not demand attention through decoration. It asserts its presence through form. That quiet confidence is rare. Today, the Great Pyramid continues to invite questions, not because history has failed to explain it, but because curiosity has not exhausted it. Each generation approaches it with new tools, new perspectives, and new assumptions, and the pyramid accommodates them all. Some answers will become clearer over time. Others may remain open. Both outcomes are acceptable. Understanding the Great Pyramid does not require uncovering a final secret or overturning established history. It requires patience, the same quality that allowed it to survive for thousands of years. Perhaps the pyramid's greatest legacy is not what it reveals, but how it teaches us to approach the past, carefully, respectfully, and without the need for certainty. Some monuments are meant to be solved. Others are meant to be understood, again and again. The Great Pyramid belongs to the second kind.